West Texas then and now. Today we're at Fort Phantom Hill, just north of Abilene. You don't have to worry about phantoms here, but you do have to beware of rattlesnakes. The year was 1851, and it was a peaceful time for the United States Army. No wars, but there were a few problems on the frontier as the westward expansion grew. At the time, the U.S. Army consisted of 8 regiments of infantry, 4 regiments of artillery, 2 regiments of dragoons, and 1 regiment of mounted riflemen. Each infantry regiment consisted of 10 companies. 5 companies of the 5th Infantry Regiment were sent to establish a post on the Clear Fork of the Brazos River at a place known as Phantom Hill. Nothing was easy for the soldiers as they had many long days of marching. Some marched from as far away as Fort Smith in Arkansas. Some marched from the Indian Territory in what's now Oklahoma. The gathering place was Fort Belknap near present-day Newcastle, Texas. In November, the infantry soldiers led by Colonel John J. Abercrombie carried their equipment, followed by wagons driven by teamsters which carried supplies and other goods needed to build a fort. Several days into the march, the soldiers encountered a Texas blue norther with howling winds and low temperatures. 27 mules and oxen perished. 1 teamster also succumbed to the sudden, bitter cold temperature. Upon arrival at Phantom Hill, camp was set and the business of building a new fort began. One officer, Lieutenant Clinton Lear, wrote a letter to his wife telling her,
"We have arrived at a point known as Phantom Hill. Too much cannot be said for its beauty. The country around here is alive with deer, turkey, and bear."
Not too long later, Lieutenant Lear again wrote to his wife,
"When I say to you that we have a beautiful valley to look upon, I have said everything favorable that could be said of this place. We are camped in a grove of blackjack 200 or 300 yards of the creek, which is salt. Everybody is disgusted. Like the dove after the deluge, not one green sprig can we find to indicate that this was ever intended by man to inhabit."
The first housing for the soldiers were canvas tents, but they soon began building more permanent structures. By April of 1852, there were 284 officers and enlisted men assigned to the fort. Supplies had to be brought several hundred miles by wagon and often arrived late. Men and animals stayed hungry. Almost every soldier and officer spent time in the hospital at one time or another. The water from the nearby creek was salty, and the Clear Fork of the Brazos River was brackish. A deep well was dug, but it often ran dry. Luckily, they found a small spring only 4 miles away. The fort was charged with keeping travelers and settlers safe from Comanche raiding parties, but for the most part, there were few problems between the soldiers of the fort and the Comanches. Most contact between the two were friendly, and Comanche Chief Buffalo Hump was a frequent visitor to the fort. In addition to the Comanche, other visitors included members of the Kiowa, Apache, Wichita, and Kickapoo tribes. By 1853, almost 1/3 of the U.S. Army was stationed in Texas, many of the troops serving in primitive, undermanned outposts along the border and the western frontier. Brevet Lieutenant Colonel William Grigsby Freeman set out in June of that year on the first inspection tour of those new forts and later wrote a detailed report to the Assistant Adjutant General in Washington. His report paints a vivid picture of the earliest U.S. Army installations on Texas soil and the kind of life the soldiers endured in them. Of Fort Phantom Hill, Colonel Freeman said,
"The aspects of this place is uninviting. No post visited except Fort Ewell presented so few attractions."
Later, in 1853, things began to change as Indian raids increased and travelers and settlers were being killed or kidnapped. Plans were made to shift from infantry and dragoons to mounted cavalry units. Those plans included abandoning Fort Phantom Hill. First Lieutenant Newton Givens took command of the fort from Major Sibley, who commanded Company 1 of the 2nd Dragoons. Lieutenant Givens' command lasted just over a month and was the last command for the frontier fort. By the end of March 1854, the fort had only 2 commissioned officers and 41 soldiers left. Givens gave the order for his troops to abandon the fort and declared it done on April 4, 1854. It is said that Lieutenant Givens' last act was to burn the fort, and he was brought before a military court-martial on those charges. He was acquitted, but given a 9-month suspension and a second court-martial. Even though the fort was severely damaged by the fire, it became a Butterfield stage stop, as well as a gathering place for cowboys and cattle herds on the Goodnight Loving Trail. U.S. Cavalry mounted patrols from Fort Concho and San Angelo regularly camped at the old fort. Buffalo hunters and traders also frequented the site. In time, a small town sprang up at the site and briefly became the county seat for Jones County, until the seat was moved to nearby Anson. The railroad chose to come through Abilene, 14 miles to the south of the old fort, and those 2 events effectively ended the town.
We hope you've enjoyed our trip to Fort Phantom Hill in West Texas. For more information on this historical site, please visit our website at wttn.deepcreeksound.com. That's wttn.deepcreeksound.com.